Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on a vision for continental scale biology, research at multiple scales conducted by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. My name is Cliff Duke. I'm the study director, and I would like to introduce Dr. Jack Liu, who is the committee chair for this study, to start us off. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon and good morning, depending where you are. And thank you so much for coming and welcome to this presentation of the report of the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And the title of the report is A Vision for Continental-Scale Biology, Research Across Multiple Scales. Next slide, please. As Cliff said, my name is Jack Liu. I'm the chair of the committee that wrote this report, and I'm so fortunate to have an excellent group of colleagues for on the committee who did a great job in this work. And also today we have several of my fellow committee members are here. I have Brian and also Jenny and Bala and Scott and Chelsea and Phoebe. So welcome everybody. Also, we are very grateful to the National Academy staff led by Cliff Duke, and they did a fantastic job in supporting the work that we did. And also, we are grateful to the financial support to the sponsor, the National Science Foundation. Next slide, please. And we also benefit enormously from the speakers at the public information gathering sessions, including some NSF staff and also keynote speakers, Jeanette Franklin from San Diego State and Simon Levin from Princeton University, and also several dozen other leading experts who provide the important input for the committee to consider. And also, the report was rigorously reviewed by a number of leading experts, including review monitor Mary Powell and Kathleen Withers coordinated the review, and also 8 experts who did very fantastic work in providing very constructive, helpful comments to improve the report. Next slide, please. And the committee really see a great need and for this study, and as the impact of climate change, biodiversity, and other stressors accelerate, there is really an urgent need to gain knowledge of these critical factors, how they interact, and how they should inform decision making. So the goal of this study is to identify productive routes for the development of continental multi-scale biology and strategies to facilitate the reunification of biology across organizational, spatial, and temporal scales. This report builds on some recent and current programs by NSF and other agencies. Those programs aim to enhance our understanding of biological systems by integrating methods and knowledge from many sub-disciplines of biology and other scientific disciplines, and at many different scales. And some of the NSF programs include Integrated Biology, Biological Integration Institute, Understanding Rules of Life, and the Microsystems Biology and the NEON-enabled science. Next slide, please. The statement of task is basically to conduct a consensus study to identify how biological research at multiple scales can inform the development of continental scale biology. More specifically, the committee was asked to identify practices that have been used successfully to transfer knowledge, approaches, and tools from small-scale biological research to regional and continental scale, and vice versa. Also, to identify challenges that prevent uptake of those practices and specific questions that could serve as pilots for implementing research projects that integrate one or more successful practices. Finally, the committee was asked to review and refine practices and questions into a set of recommendations for the research community, the funders, and decision makers. Next slide. The report structure is as follows. It begins with a summary and has 6 chapters, including introduction, themes for a continental scale biology, theoretical underpinnings for a continental scale biology, research infrastructure that enable continental scale biology, training and capacity building to enable continental scale biology. And finally, the committee made overarching recommendations and provide a vision for continental scale biology. Next slide, please. The committee first identified the definition of continental scale biology. And it says CSB addresses questions about biological processes and patterns that emerge at broader organizational, spatial, and/or temporal scales that cannot be answered by observation and experiment conducted at either fine or larger scales alone. CSB inherently incorporate multiple scales from molecular to the global biosphere, from the local to global spatial extent, and from less than a second to millennium. Specific CSB research may operate across 1, 2, or all 3 kinds of scales: organizational, spatial, or temporal. Next slide. And the committee identified a set of organization scales for continental scale biology, from molecules to cells and tissue and organisms, population, community, ecosystem, biomes, to the global biospheres. Next slide. And also the committee identified a systems approach, treat biological systems as part of coupled human natural systems, because there are now widespread human impacts and intensifying human nature interactions worldwide. So as this diagram shows, humans have impact on natural systems, including biological system. The changes in biological system and natural system will affect humans as feedback. Then the human behavior may also change and then constitute complex feedback loops on biological systems. Next slide, please. And also the committee identified a number of enablers for the continental scale biology, and including emergent theories and also recent development in research infrastructure, including experiment and observation networks such as NEON, and the tools such as omics, remote sensing, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. And also a set of synthesis centers, such as the Environment Data Science Innovation and the Inclusion Lab, and the National Center for the Emergence in the Molecular and the Cellular Sciences, and also an upcoming Resilience Center of the Integrated Organismal Systems. Also, there are a lot of changes in the culture of biological sciences that facilitate collaboration among multiple disciplines and the team members from diverse backgrounds across the globe. Next slide, please. The committee also identified 4 major themes that the continental scale biology can support. Those themes have been extensively studied, but mainly from one scale at a time, largely. And these themes including biodiversity and ecosystem function. So the continental scale biology could use emerging tools such as remote sensing, omics, AI, and other tools, and the broader networks to examine links between biodiversity and ecosystem function across scales, and how those relationships may change in the face of global change. The third major theme is resilience and vulnerability. So the continental scale biology could assess the sensitivity of biological systems and their adaptive capacity to resist, recover, or change in response to human and environment disturbances across scales. The third one is connectivity. Because the whole world is increasingly interconnected, changes in one place could affect the other places nearby or far away. So continental scale biology could offer tools to combine observation of different biotic and abiotic components to build a stronger understanding of connections among these different components and also across time and space. And the fourth major theme is sustainability of ecosystem services. And the continental scale biology could help to apply knowledge of systems resilience and vulnerability and to stressors on how sustainability of ecosystems may be affected by global change. So those themes are interrelated. For example, biodiversity, resilience, and connectivity could all affect the sustainability of ecosystem services. And also, those themes are not comprehensive. The purpose here is to provide a starting point for discussion to promote and stimulate the development of continental scale biology. Also, for each major theme, the committee identified a number of questions to start stimulate the development of continental scale biology. So those questions are not comprehensive either. So keep that in mind. We just trying to inspire the discussion and to help move the field forward. Next slide. Also, the committee identified conclusions and recommendations for realizing continental scale biology. Now I'm going to invite my colleague, Brian, to present recommendations, conclusions from chapter 3, the theories. Brian.
Great. Thank you very much, Jack. What I would like to do is I'd like to cover chapter 3. So chapter 3 in the report describes the theoretical underpinnings for continental scale biology. And in particular, we identified 4 theory requirements to enable and support advancing continental scale biology science. The first is theory is needed to be applicable at multiple spatial and temporal scales, encompassing attributes of individuals such as traits and genes, as well as populations, species assemblages that operate on landscapes all the way up to the entire biosphere. Second, theory is needed to mesh and guide the collection and curation of diverse data sets data streams, technologies, and monitoring programs, both guiding their development and being flexible enough to change in response to new knowledge. Third, theory is needed to forge connections across biological processes, from the molecular and cellular levels to populations, entire ecosystems, and the biosphere. And finally, fourth, theory development should be comprehensive, unifying disparate domains from microbial processes to these specific areas that are listed here on the slides. First, theory is needed that links research on multiple organizational, spatial, and temporal scales, all the way from the micro to the meter to landscapes up to the biosphere. Second, theory is needed to improve climate and global change models by including, in particular, biological feedbacks. And third, theory is needed that incorporates the effects of human-induced environmental changes, including climate, land use change, in order to predict changes within an ecosystem and to assess meta-coupled cascading effects, adjacent and distant systems. And so now I turn to my colleague, Chelsea, to discuss Chapter 4 on research infrastructure to support continental-scale biology.
Thank you, Brian. Fully responding to the challenges of developing CSB requires both the enhancement of existing and the development of new infrastructure. The committee offers the following recommendation and conclusion to NSF and other agencies. First, to provide infrastructure specifically aimed at supporting CSB, the National Science Foundation should consider the following options as available resources permit. Examples include explore development of AI and informatics tools and open access databases explicitly focused on continental scale biology, build new sensor modalities to improve data collection, allocate resources for next generation digitization of biodiversity collections, and support efforts to understanding how to sample for continental scale biological questions. We also offer a conclusion for other agencies. Development of research infrastructure for continental scale biology would also benefit from these actions by other agencies. First, the Small Business Administration could develop agency-specific small business innovation research RFPs that focus on AI, ML, and sensor development for biological and ecological sciences. Other agencies could continue NASA support for surface biology and geology satellite missions. Also continue agency support for the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, the Group on Earth Observations Biodiversity Observation Network, and the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And finally, continue agency support for the National Nature Assessment, the Biodiversity and Climate Change Assessment, and the 30 by 30 Conservation Initiative. My colleague Bala Chaudhry will now discuss research and training needs to support continental scale biology.
Thanks, Chelsea. The committee identified 3 key areas that funders, researchers, and educators should prioritize for developing a continental scale biology workforce. In particular, 3 key areas of training are most relevant to developing a scientific workforce with the knowledge and skills necessary to address future challenges in CSB. Data literacy, interdisciplinary team science, and promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Now, these are not unique to CSB, but effective development of this field is particularly dependent on them. For example, large-scale spatial and temporal data across scales are essential in CSB research. So data literacy from basic to high-level expertise will be necessary across team members to ensure an efficient workflow. Furthermore, systems thinking that emphasizes processes, relationships, feedbacks, and synthesis is critical to research advancements in CSB. Teamwork involving several disciplinary expertise and skill sets is also inherent in CSB research, such that effective communication and productive interactions across team participants with different backgrounds will be critical to ensure successful project outcomes. Finally, to maximize creativity and productivity, we note that the interdisciplinary nature of CSB necessitates inclusivity, diversity, and evidence-based practices in team science. And we summarize some of those practices in the report. We now turn back to Jack to describe our overarching recommendations and a vision for CSB.
Thank you so much, Bella and Brian and Chelsea. After our presentation, there will be time for questions. So the audience is welcome to put questions in the Q&A box so the committee can address your questions. So we have two overarching recommendations. The first one is the National Science Foundation should establish a core program on continental-scale biology. And because this program could provide stable and dedicated funding source to support research addressing the interplay of multiple organizational, spatial, and temporal scales. And so far, NSF has some programs to address some of the issues at some of the scales. And those are very important and excellent and should continue, but they may not be sufficient because we needed to address those challenges across from molecular way up to the global biosphere scales. So those kind of new, bold initiatives are needed to really advance the field. The next slide, please. Thank you. Also, the committee recommend that researchers, funders should develop continental-scale biology under integrated yet flexible framework, so such as the meta-carbon framework. And the framework can help and enable researchers to better understand and contextualize the connection among biological, abiotic, and social economic components, and the interactions within, between, among adjacent and distant systems, such as different locations, a forest or a wetland or county or state or a country. And so there are a lot of systems that we're interested in, such as the study site, the long-term ecological study site or NEON site, and also have interaction with adjacent systems. And those systems interactions are very important. And also have interaction with distant systems. They are far away, but there are a lot of social economic as well as environmental ecological flows among different systems that will change the system structural dynamics and composition and sustainability as well. So, next slide, please. And the vision of continental scale biology is the one that integrates across multiple biological subdisciplines, as well as other disciplines such as social sciences and technology and across multiple scales of research, harnessing the power of biological data revolution to address questions that cannot be answered by observation and experiment conducted at either farm or larger scale alone. So bold initiatives are needed to create a truly continental scale biology that address questions about complex biological systems, including humans and abiotic factors across multiple organizational, temporal, and scales from a systems perspective. Okay. So realize the vision can really have huge benefit, can lead to new, exciting scientific discoveries, and also effective solutions to global challenges, such as biodiversity loss, climate change, food security, and so on and so forth. So this is very important to help us to achieve a sustainable and resilient planet. So thank you so much for your attention and for your time. So now we are open up for questions, and also I'm delighted that some other committee members also joined us, such as Shahid, besides what I mentioned before, Stephanie. Some of them are in remote area, so the internet connection may not be as good. So, but I will ask Cliff to read the questions.
Certainly, Jack. Okay, so we have one question so far, and I'll just read it word for word. I'm curious whether this vision encompasses working with those programs attempting to bring the concepts into the active world. There are many successful practitioners out there who have actually tried to apply these concepts, often successfully. Why not bring them into the discussion of practical practices?
Okay. Anyone, the committee? And so, Shahid, can you do it?
Well, it's a little difficult to know. I think that we had a number of invited guests who came and speak to us. Some of these might be the practitioners that the person asking the question is thinking of. We also did a lot of conversation with others on our own, and have had a number of meetings online too. As far as carrying it further, now that the report is out, I hope that there will be more opportunities to do so, perhaps through the national centers or a research coordinated network grant, to bring people together to pursue this and the recommendations of the report further.
Yeah, thank you. Jenny, is your internet okay?
I think I can speak. I'm going to
Okay. Yeah.
colleague Olivia.
Yeah.
Did you want me to?
Yeah. If you can address, from your perspective,
further to that question.
Yeah.
Well, what I see here from COP16 in Cali is a great number of efforts globally to try to think across scales. Many people have local projects, but are trying to connect to the global biodiversity framework and international targets that have been established to conserve and enhance biodiversity. And so being able to do the science to work across scales from local to regional to global is really critical to underpin the action-oriented work that's being called for at the international level, and that is also in line with US targets through the 30 by 30 effort. So I would say this is an ongoing effort. This report really supports the US research community and practicing community in working towards those international global biodiversity framework targets.
Great, thank you. Actually, one of our committee members is from USDA, Chelsea. Will you want to add something to this discussion?
I can, thank you. It's hard to understand what the question is really getting at, but I do know that there are people actively applying continental scale biology by harnessing citizen science and databases that exist and applying them to practical land management questions. I'm thinking of one that is encompassing or using citizen science from the Cornell Ornithology Lab to predicting interactive range maps of species of conservation concern that are dynamic so that we don't have one single map, but we have a dynamically updated map from these networks that are validated by citizen science. So I'm not sure if that gets at the question from the person who asked it, but we did, as Shahid mentioned, bring in a lot of people who into the discussion to inform our report, who are using these using this approach in a practical way.
Thank you. Yeah.
Jack, there is another question up if you'd like me to read it.
Okay, maybe you can read that. Yeah.
Certainly. Do you think there is a bias or challenge between funding continental scale biology versus classic experimental biology? I have seen a considerable amount of dismissal from research who use more manipulative / hypothetical / deductive frameworks.
Okay. Cool. Brian, will you want to address that?
Yeah, I can speak a little to that. As someone who also does field experimentation, I actually find that the efforts to focus on the need for developing a continental scale biology is one that is actually firmly rooted in understanding and linking, on the ground field research, including experimental approaches. So I guess I don't necessarily see anything that's at odds or counter to maybe more smaller scale efforts and hypotheoretical efforts than to to address classic ecological questions at smaller scales.
Great, thank you, Brian. Bala, you want to add to that?
I could comment on this a little bit. When we talked about training needs for continental scale biology, we in the report talk a fair amount about ways of knowing and how the scientific endeavor can or may and maybe should shift and in a way that's broadening. And so we talked about not just different approaches to addressing scientific questions, but we talked about approaches that are data science driven. We talked about traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous and traditional ecological knowledge. And so in training, we see that as a strong recommendation of sort of widening the tent around ways of knowing when addressing CSB questions.
Yeah, thank you. Phoebe, you want to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Brian that having field-based experimental research really informs us a lot in terms of the fundamental mechanisms and processes that might be underlying, for example, species responses to climate change. And by manipulating things at a local scale, we gain a lot of inference about what might be causing the changes we observed at these broader spatial scales. So I think they really feed back on each other. And I think the challenge here is to recognize that instead of focusing on one scale, this continental scale biology aspect really emphasizes multiple scales and the connections between them. So that's a great way for theory, experimental, and observational research across scales to really connect. So I definitely think that that's like an inherent component of continental scale biology, to recognize all of these scales need to work together, and we need to address them, comprehensively.
Thank you. We have a member of the committee who used to be at NSF for many years, Stephanie. I don't know whether she has the right internet connection because she is now in COP 16 in Colombia. Stephanie, is your internet okay?
Well, we can find out.
Okay.
Okay. I don't have much to add beyond what others have said, but I think many or most of us on the committee have experience working at multiple scales, which is probably why we were on the committee. And I think all of us found that these are complementary approaches. And so I don't know if we're ever going to convince people who only work at the smaller scales with experimentation that it's important and useful to scale up across these multiple levels of organization. But there are many of us out there working productively in using multiple modes. And I think it is going to be the way that we help to make scientific knowledge useful at the scales that is necessary for some of our goals around building a resilient planet.
Yeah, that's great. The question was about whether there is a bias or challenge between funding continental scale biology or other type of biology. During your time at NSF, did you see any this kind of challenges between different programs, different types of biology research support?
Yeah, sorry, I missed that part. Yeah, I think it is. It's very cultural, program by program, I would say. So I don't know that it's certainly, I wouldn't say that it's a bias across programs. It definitely is not. But culturally, anybody who served on a panel or served on more than one panel for different programs would have seen that, and that culture that comes from us, that comes from the research community, not necessarily from NSF. So it varies, culture varies by program because it varies among our disciplines and our subdisciplines.
Thank you. So Scott there, Scott, do you have anything you want to add something related to this question?
I think it's the responses that my colleagues on this committee have given have been really excellent, hitting on this point. My personal work is, heavily focused on Earth observation, satellite monitoring. So I come from sort of that end of the spectrum, but I've been doing this for enough decades that I've seen similar questions in the past in terms of, a potential perspective that maybe the very local scale, not micro, but fine scale studies are being sort of almost dismissed. But I think we've been around doing this stuff for so long that I think most of the people who are involved in it realize that we actually really need all these measurements across scales. We need the finest scale data in order to be able to get at the theory, as Brian pointed out, and to, actually scale up the measurements so that we can cover extensive spatial and temporal domains using a variety of methods like Earth observation. So hopefully that adds to the points that have been made by others.
Thank you. I saw Shahid, your hands on.
Yeah, just to follow up on what others have said, it's not so much a bias. I think that with the increase in sort of technological capabilities for doing large scale work or continental scale work, with the rapid rise in AI and databases and database sharing, that also has led to more funding in that direction. And some research has always been expensive, whether it's space satellites or ocean-going vessels. I think if I were to see one place where there is definitely bias, and I think it's not just in the funding, I think it's also in our culture that's been changing, is doing sort of natural history work. And we really need to expand our databases from, say, taxonomy or phylogenomics to functional diversity, because in many cases, the value of biodiversity has to do with what the species do, not so much, how they're evolutionarily related to one another. Although you might be able to work that out. I imagine many of us would agree that there does seem to be a decrease in interest in natural history at a time when it's probably needed more than ever. And I will confess that I don't do natural history. So I'm as guilty as any.
Jack, there are a couple of more questions if you'd like me to.
Yeah,
continue.
please. Yeah. Please.
The next one is, can you all provide an example of a current project working across multiple scales that also fits your definition of CSB?
Okay, I can give a try. So one example actually in the report is about pandas, people, and policy. And this project had been supported by NSF, but from different projects. And so this project really address issues in terms of organization scale, from DNA to individual to population to community and ecosystem, and to regional and to continental and to global. And also the spatial from local to global, and we use field work as well as remote sensing to understand the larger scale patterns and also small scale processes and patterns as well. And the temporal scales from the past to present and to the future. And we also integrate biology of pandas with social economics, trying to understand how humans affect the panda habitat, and then how the changes in the panda habitat affect the government, which will develop new policy, and then new policy affect people's behavior, which again will affect the panda habitat. So you have a complex feedback loops there. And this approach really helped the scientific community as well as policymakers to understand the population and the habitat for the pandas, but also the local community. And the government developed new policies, and the new conservation effort actually helped pandas from in the endangered species list. Now, since 2016, it was delisted from the endangered species list. So that's a kind of example of successful story. Of course, there are a lot of more work to do, and because climate change will have impact on the future habitat for the pandas, including bamboo, the major food source for the pandas. So this is one example. I saw Jenny also raise hands. Maybe she can provide another example. Jenny?
Yes, can you hear me? So I would like to point out the role of networks, which we emphasized in chapter 4, and a good example, nutrient network, which involves among people around the globe, and they scales on a consistent experiment that can be interpreted locally, but they combine their data to gain an inference of continental and global scales. And so that's a beautiful example of a kind of a network that is scale biology. The Forest Geo Network is doing something similar. And then I'll highlight biology integration institutes that NSF is funding, including advanced in changing environments to understand diversity, where we use spectral reflection, individual plants, within communities and ecosystems across landscapes and across continents to make fine scale and large differences processes to get at the causes and consequences of biodiversity. So those are a couple of examples.
Yeah, thank you so much. Brian?
Yeah, throughout the report, we list several examples, that we could point to. So I would point to the report itself, to find many specific examples. Just one of many that I could point to is the East River Watershed, or the SFA, which is a DOE-supported effort. But that effort includes a very nice model and a very nice roadmap in terms of the vision of how to best link genomic, microbial, and vegetation surveys, as well as local small-scale experiments, in order then to address larger scale questions associated with hydrology, and in particular, the importance of water and the movement of water then through a mountain watershed that also has important implications for people, including ranching, as well as local conservation efforts. And so that SFA group also includes, multiple efforts associated with measuring water and nutrient fluxes, then through watersheds, as well as many different remote sensing efforts. And a lot of that group is also involved in then trying to scale up, what they learn from local scales, watershed level scales, all the way to continental scales. So that's just one example of a group very much doing continental scale biology.
Thank you. Anyone else want to give more examples? Or?
Jack, there's another question in the queue if you like.
Oh, okay. Maybe we can move to the next question.
Okay, this will not be surprising. Thanks all. Can someone help me understand how this recommended program compares or contrasts with the now sunsetted NSF macrosystems biology?
Okay. Stephanie, you want to say something?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly it builds on the body of work and the strength and the capacity that Macrosystems program developed. I think one of the big differences I see that is really exciting is really encouraging researchers to flesh out some of the biological aspects at the smaller scales. So Macrosystems has been really powerful in building networks of researchers across disciplines, and including those in some of the subdisciplines of biology. But I think this report really encourages people to reach out to colleagues who are doing omics, for example, that could be scaled up, or other sort of finer scale biological mechanisms that can help to create patterns across scales. So I think that's one of the big differences that I see that is really exciting. And I imagine that several of us on the committee would all have different perspectives on what's most exciting in the ways that it differs from what's been done before at NSF.
Great, thank you so much. Phoebe, you want to provide your perspective?
Sure. Yes. I mean, as someone who's been funded by the Macrosystems program, I really appreciate the focus on multiple scales. And I think that is something that's similar here, except that, as Stephanie pointed out, we really want to emphasize that we can go beyond thinking about regional to continental scales or local to continental, and to really expand this over temporal scales, over organizational scales in biology. To really expand out and embrace a lot of the insights that our colleagues in other subdisciplines might provide, for example, with computer science, engineering even, mathematics. And so I think there's just a really great opportunity for continental scale biology to embrace a lot of these other disciplines, and especially go especially to these finer scales in biology and in time and in space.
Great, thank you so much. Any other William, Bala, wants it? So one thing that I will add is that this new program that we recommended will be broader than the microsystem biology. One dimension is that will specifically integrate social sciences and as well as AI and machine learning and other tools. So those new tools were not available at that time when the microsystem biology program was still on. So that's another thing that I want to add. And also we want to understand how a place in change could have impact on other places nearby and far away. So that's, I think, more explicit than the previous microsystem biology program had been supported. I was fortunate to get one project supported by that program, but I think the new program we recommended will go beyond what we had before. So thank you. Stephanie, I saw your hands up.
Yeah, you mentioning tools also reminded me that, you know, the macrosystems program really has been the main funder of the researchers who use NEON, the big National Ecological Observatory network that NSF has invested in building across the continental U.S. and, or sorry, beyond the continental U.S., but across the U.S. And this report really helps us to think about some of the ways that NEON may be used innovatively, not just for ecology, but also for some of the other biological disciplines. And of course, as you mentioned, the many other disciplines that macrosystems had already encouraged. But, you know, we imagined some of the exciting ways that molecular or organismal scientists might use NEON to examine big abiotic gradients and how they may relate to variation that shows up in enzymes, for example, or evolution of enzymes. Or proteins. So those sorts of questions that ecologists frequently don't think about. So this program could help to open up some of those innovative questions that are across scales.
Jack, we have about 5 minutes left and no open questions. Would you like to see if any committee members would like to make any final remarks, including yourself?
Thank you. Yeah. So one thing I want to add to this answer to this question is that there are other new exciting tools like digital twins. That's something that a new exciting field that we want to take advantage of. And there are a lot of successful examples in other fields, but this is a new tool, new platform could help for to this Continental-Scale Biology as well. So I think that's one thing that a lot of people are very thrilled to have this possibility. Janine.
Yeah, I can emphasize two aspects that are exciting. So we recommend using biodiversity collections. So getting back to natural history, hundreds of years of accumulated knowledge that are in our preserved specimen collections and doing next generation kinds of data, adding those kinds of data like spectral data, like all different kinds of scanning, genomic information, so that that information that anchors our understanding of biodiversity can be used at continental scales and also to look back through time at change. So, and that dovetails with other recommendations by NSF currently to take advantage of biodiversity collections. And a second area that is exciting is we also recommend to be ready and connect to NASA's surface biology and geology mission. So working with other agencies to that are investing in data collection at large spatial scales that can be dovetailed with work done at local and regional scales.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then other Shahid, you want to have a concluding remarks from your perspective?
Well, I think the report reflects the value of having a great diversity of people who work across, and as someone suggested, that might have been why we were invited to participate in this. Most of us here have cross disciplines from theory to empirical to observational studies, and have tried, I think, in our work throughout our careers to link from the molecular, from the nanosecond to the biosphere. I think it's notable that we have two of our committee members at COP16 right now who found the time to phone in and participate in this, because that conference has already put out some statements how important these global change factors are and the urgency in addressing them. So it was a great success, I feel.
Thank you. Chelsea? You're muted. Or we can come back later. But Paula?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just add that, you know, from the perspective of the training and capacity building chapter that I worked on with several others in the committee, I think we just early on, we realized that you know, how the new recommendations, you know, just recognize that the field is going nowhere fast if we can't train people in the methods that are required to do the work. And so really the recommendation around growing training at many different stages, and a lot of these skills that are required of systems thinking across temporal and spatial scales are key. And I guess another core recommendation that I see that's different from the previous macro systems program. So I'm really excited about just the energy around that and the energy that will be generated with the new generation of scientists coming forward.
Thank you so much. Scott?
Yeah, I'm optimistic that those remaining on the call will explore the report as well as many others and delve into it. And it's been a very good experience to be involved. I will add just a quick thing, I guess, from my perspective. Janine mentioned NASA's Surface Biology and Geology mission, which is due to launch in, hopefully less than a decade. But there are other really significant Earth observation capabilities, particularly in relation to three-dimensional canopy structure from LiDAR instruments that have really blown open a lot of fascinating biodiversity research in terms of habitat use and suitability and relevance to threatened and endangered species and so on. So I just wanted to point that.
Jack,
thank you so much.
Jack, I hate to interrupt, but we are at time.
Okay. So, okay, that's great. Thank you all so much for participating, and thanks to the excellent committee members. And so if you have any more questions, we'll be happy to answer in the future by email or other ways to further discuss. Okay.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And this webinar has been recorded and should be available on the National Academies website within a week or so. And as Jack says, feel free to email me in particular with any questions you have, cduke@nas.edu. My thanks to all the participants and to our excellent committee for their work on this report.
Thank you. Yeah.